They called her the worst marksman in Fort Sterling's history, missing targets that recruits could hit blindfolded. What they didn't know was that Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood was the legendary ghost of Kunar, the sniper who had single-handedly eliminated an entire terrorist cell from 2 miles away and was now hiding in plain sight to escape the death squads hunting her across 3 continents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rifle range at Fort Sterling as Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood adjusted her grip on the standard-issue M24 sniper rifle. Around her, the other trainees in the Advanced Marksmanship Program chatted nervously, their voices mixing with the distant sound of drill sergeants barking orders across the base. This was week 3 of the 8-week program, and Zara had already earned a reputation that followed her like a bad smell. "Here comes Deadeye Blackwood," Sergeant Derek Lawson announced loudly enough for the entire firing line to hear. His voice carried the particular brand of cruelty that came naturally to men who had never been told they were wrong about anything. "Thinks you actually hit the target board today, or just the dirt again?" The laughter that rippled through the group of trainees was sharp and cutting. Phones emerged from pockets as Derek's unofficial fan club prepared to document another episode of what they had dubbed the Zara Show, a daily humiliation festival that Derek orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. Zara's hands remained steady on her rifle despite the familiar knot of rage building in her chest. She had been deliberately missing these targets for 3 weeks now, each shot carefully placed to look like incompetence rather than the surgical precision that had once made her the most feared sniper in 3 theaters of operation. Every miss was calculated, every frustrated shake of her head perfectly performed, every adjustment to her scope a masterpiece of misdirection. What Derek and his followers didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the woman they were mocking had once held a terrorist leader in her crosshairs from 2,847 meters away, in conditions that would have made their training look like a children's game. She had made that shot in a sandstorm, with enemy mortar falling around her position, while injured and running on 3 hours of sleep in 4 days. $20 says she doesn't even hit the target, called out Corporal Emma Walsh, Derek's most enthusiastic supporter. Emma was everything Zara pretended to be, genuinely struggling with marksmanship, genuinely frustrated by her limitations, genuinely grateful for Derek's attention and protection. "You're on," Derek replied, pulling out his phone to start recording. "This is going to be comedy gold. Hey Blackwood, try not to shoot yourself in the foot this time." Master Sergeant Victoria Reed, the range instructor, watched the interaction with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many promising careers destroyed by pack mentality. She had been trying to understand Zara Blackwood for 3 weeks now, and nothing about the woman made sense. Her fundamental understanding of ballistics was flawless, better than some instructors. Her equipment maintenance was textbook perfect. Her physical conditioning was exceptional. Yet somehow she couldn't hit a target at 300 meters at most. Recruits could handle after their first week. "All right, people," Reed called out, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "This is a training exercise, not a circus. Eyes on your own performance." But Derek was already in full performance mode, his audience hanging on every word. "Look at her stance," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear while pretending to offer constructive criticism. Textbook form for missing spectacularly. She's got the trigger discipline of a stormtrooper. Zara settled into her firing position with movements that would have impressed any sniper instructor who knew what to look for. Her breathing was controlled, her grip consistent, her body alignment perfect. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly, a simple black circle on white paper, 300 meters downrange. In her peripheral vision, she caught Captain Nathan Cross observing from the observation tower, his expression thoughtful rather than amused. Cross had been watching Zara for 2 weeks now, ever since he had noticed inconsistencies that troubled his analytical mind. She moved like a veteran, not a struggling trainee. Her equipment was arranged with the obsessive precision of someone who had learned that organization could mean the difference between life and death. Most tellingly, she never seemed surprised by her failures. Disappointed, yes, but never shocked the way genuinely struggling marksmen were. The first shot rang out across the range, and Zara's bullet struck the dirt 18 inches below the target. Derek's crowd erupted in laughter and applause, phones capturing every moment of what they believed was authentic incompetence. Zara shook her head in apparent frustration, making the show of adjusting her scope while internally calculating the exact trajectory needed to miss by precisely that margin. Classic Blackwood, Derek announced to his growing social media following. She's got the natural talent of a blindfolded toddler. I don't know how she even made it into this program. What Derek didn't know was that Zara had volunteered for this program specifically because it was the perfect place to hide. Advanced Marksmanship was where the military sent promising soldiers to become elite snipers, the last place anyone would look for someone trying to disappear from the world of precision killing. Her plan had been simple: perform poorly enough to wash out quietly, then transfer to a support role where she could serve her country without drawing the attention of the international death squads that had been hunting the ghost of Kunar for 3 years. The second shot was another careful miss, this time 2 feet to the left of the target. Zara maintained her facade of concentration and growing frustration, even as part of her mind was automatically calculating wind speed, humidity, and a dozen other factors that affected bullet trajectory. It was muscle memory now, as involuntary as breathing, the result of years spent in places where a miscalculation meant death for herself or the soldier she was protecting. "Somebody get that woman a seeing eye dog," Derek called out, earning another round of laughter from his audience. At this rate, she'd be lucky to qualify for mess hall duty. Master Sergeant Reed moved down the firing line, observing each trainee's performance with the critical eye of someone who had trained hundreds of snipers over her career. When she reached Zara's position, she paused longer than usual, studying not just the results but the process. Something about Zara's technique nagged at her: the way she held the rifle, the rhythm of her breathing, the micro-adjustments she made between shots. "Blackwood," Reed said quietly, crouching beside Zara's position, "your fundamentals are solid. What's happening when you take the shot?" Zara looked up with carefully crafted confusion and frustration. "I don't know, Sergeant. I follow all the steps, but somehow the shots keep going wide. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." It was a perfectly delivered performance, complete with the slight tremor in her voice that suggested someone on the edge of giving up. But Reed's experienced eye caught something else: the way Zara's hands never actually trembled, the way her breathing remained controlled even while expressing frustration, the way her equipment was arranged with a precision that spoke of years of field experience. The third shot was another miss, carefully placed to suggest someone who was trying hard but lacking fundamental skill. Derek's commentary had grown more creative and cruel with each failure, his audience of trainees hanging on every word like he was providing professional entertainment rather than destroying someone's confidence and career. Captain Cross descended from the observation tower and approached Reed with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a decision. "Sergeant Reed, I need to speak with you about trainee Blackwood." Reed nodded, having expected this conversation. 3 weeks of spectacular failure from someone with perfect fundamentals had raised questions that needed answers. "Sir, I've been wondering about her myself. Her technical knowledge is exceptional, but her performance doesn't match," Cross finished. "I want you to run a background check. Something about her doesn't add up." Neither of them noticed Derek moving closer, his phone still recording, his expression shifting from amusement to something more calculating. In his grief-twisted mind, any special attention paid to Zara was evidence of conspiracy, proof that the system was rigged in favor of people who didn't deserve their positions. His brother Kevin had been a real soldier, a true marksman who had earned every accolade through blood and dedication. And here was this pretender, getting special consideration despite being the worst shot he had ever seen. As the training session ended and the trainees cleaned their weapons, Derek was already planning his next move. If the officers weren't going to see what was obvious to everyone else, he would document it himself. His social media following was growing, drawn to his authentic portrayal of military life and his willingness to call out incompetence when he saw it. What Derek didn't realize was that his documentation was about to expose more than just a struggling trainee. In a world where information moved at the speed of light and enemies had long memories, some secrets were too dangerous to reveal, even accidentally. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Fort Sterling, old enemies were listening for exactly the kind of digital breadcrumbs that Derek's crusade was about to provide. Zara cleaned her rifle with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else, each movement automatic and efficient. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities for Derek to display his cruelty, new chances to maintain her carefully constructed facade of incompetence. But tonight, in the quiet of her austere barracks room, she would clean her personal sidearm with the same care she had once used to maintain the custom rifle that had made her legend, because somewhere in the back of her mind, a warning bell was starting to chime, the same instinct that had kept her alive in places where others had not been so fortunate. The kind that told her Derek's harassment was about to become the least of her problems. Derek Lawson's campaign against Zara began with the methodical precision of a military operation, which in many ways it was. Each morning at 0500, he would position himself strategically in the mess hall where he could observe her eating habits, document her interactions with other trainees, and build what he considered to be a comprehensive profile of everything wrong with Zara Blackwood. Day 18 of documenting military mediocrity. Derek spoke into his phone camera as he filmed Zara from across the mess hall. His social media following had grown to over 15,000 followers, drawn to his authentic portrayal of military life and his willingness to expose what he saw as systematic failures in military standards. Notice how she sits alone, probably because even the other washouts can't stand being associated with her performance. The truth was more complex than Derek's narrative suggested. Zara sat alone because isolation was safer, because conversations led to questions, and questions led to scrutiny she couldn't afford. She had learned over 3 years of hiding that the best way to disappear was to become forgettable, unremarkable, the kind of person others looked through rather than at. But Derek's attention had turned her into a spectacle, and spectacles were dangerous for someone trying to remain invisible. Staff Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran who supervised the Advanced Training Program, watched Derek's morning performance with growing concern. Williams had seen enough military politics to recognize when personal vendetta disguised itself as professional concern, and Derek's obsession with Zara had crossed that line weeks ago. "Lawson," Williams called out as Derek continued his commentary. "Maybe focus on your own performance instead of providing entertainment for civilians." Derek's expression darkened at the criticism, but he lowered his phone. In his mind, Williams was part of the problem, another example of how the military had gone soft, how standards had been lowered to accommodate people who didn't belong. His brother Kevin had never received special protection when he struggled. Kevin had earned every achievement through blood, sweat, and dedication until the day he died serving his country in a foreign land that most Americans couldn't find on a map. The morning training session began with equipment inspection, and Derek positioned himself where he could observe Zara's preparation ritual. She arranged her gear with obsessive precision, rifle cleaning kit organized by size and function, ammunition counted and recounted, scope adjustments checked and double-checked. To Derek, this looked like someone overcompensating for lack of skill. To anyone with real field experience, it looked like someone whose life had once depended on equipment reliability. "Check out the gear arrangement," Derek whispered to Corporal Walsh, his most devoted follower. "She spends more time organizing her stuff than most people spend actually shooting." Classic case of style over substance. Emma Walsh nodded eagerly, grateful for Derek's attention and guidance. As someone genuinely struggling with marksmanship, she found comfort in his certainty that some people simply didn't belong in advanced programs. It made her own failures feel less personal, more like evidence that the system was flawed rather than her abilities. Master Sergeant Reed began the day's instruction with a lesson on environmental factors affecting long-range accuracy. As she spoke about wind drift, atmospheric pressure, and temperature variations, Zara found herself unconsciously nodding at concepts that had been burned into her memory through years of practical application. She caught herself and forced a look of confusion onto her face, the expression of someone hearing complex information for the first time. "These calculations might seem overwhelming," Reed continued, "but with practice, they become instinctive. The best snipers can read environmental conditions like a book." Derek seized the opportunity to provide commentary for his phone camera, speaking quietly but loud enough for nearby trainees to hear. "Notice how lost she looks when Sergeant Reed explains anything technical. You can literally see her giving up before she even tries." What Derek didn't notice was Captain Cross observing from the doorway, his expression growing more thoughtful with each passing day. Cross had requested Zara's background file, and what he had found raised more questions than it answered. Her previous duty stations were listed, but with gaps that suggested classified assignments. Her commendations were standard, but something about the language used suggested there was more to the story than official records revealed. The practical exercise began with each trainee taking a turn at the 500-meter range, a step up from the previous week's 300-meter challenges. Derek went first, demonstrating the competent but unremarkable marksmanship that had earned him his position in the program. His shots grouped nicely around the target center, earning approving nods from the instructors and applause from his followers. "That's how it's done," Derek announced, his confidence boosted by solid performance. "Fundamentals, practice, and natural ability. Some people have it, others don't." Emma Walsh followed with her characteristic struggle, shots scattered around the target in a pattern that suggested she was trying hard, but lacking the instinctive understanding that separated good marksmen from great ones. Derek offered encouraging words and technical advice, playing the role of mentor and supporter for his audience. When Zara's turn came, Derek's phone was ready. "And now for our featured entertainment," he said into the camera. "Watch closely as our resident expert demonstrates why some people should stick to desk jobs." Zara settled into her shooting position with movements so fluid and natural that they looked rehearsed. Her breathing fell into the rhythm that had once allowed her to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot. Through her scope, the target appeared crisp and clear, every detail visible despite the distance that challenged most of the other trainees. The shot she fired was another carefully calculated miss, striking the dirt 6 inches below the target. But the precision of the miss, the fact that it went exactly where she intended rather than randomly wide, would have been obvious to anyone who understood the difference between poor marksmanship and deliberate misdirection. Derek's commentary was immediate and cruel. "And there you have it, folks. Another spectacular failure from our shooting star. I'm starting to think she couldn't hit the broad side of a barn if she was standing inside it." The laughter from his audience had taken on an edge that went beyond good-natured ribbing. It was becoming something meaner, more personal, the kind of group dynamic that could destroy careers and break spirits. Other trainees who might have remained neutral were being drawn into Derek's narrative, finding it easier to join the majority than to stand up for someone who appeared to deserve the criticism. But Master Sergeant Reed was beginning to see patterns that troubled her professional instincts. Zara's misses weren't random. They followed trajectories that suggested someone who understood ballistics perfectly, but was choosing not to demonstrate that understanding. Her equipment handling was flawless, her safety protocols were automatic, and her knowledge of technical concepts was deeper than she pretended. After the session ended, Reed approached Captain Cross with concerns that had been building for days. "Sir, I need to discuss trainee Blackwood with you. Something about her performance doesn't add up." Cross nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. Her background check revealed some interesting gaps. Previous assignments that are classified above our clearance level, commendations that reference operations we don't have details on, and training records that suggest capabilities far beyond what we're seeing. You think she's deliberately underperforming?" "I think Staff Sergeant Blackwood is hiding something significant. The question is whether it's relevant to our program, or if she has reasons we need to understand." Neither of them noticed Derek. Nearby, his phone still recording, his expression shifting from amusement to something more calculating. In his mind, any special attention paid to Zara was evidence of conspiracy, proof that the system was rigged in favor of people who didn't deserve their positions. His documentation was no longer just entertainment. It was becoming evidence in a case he was building against what he saw as fundamental corruption in military standards. That evening, Derek edited his footage with the skill of someone who understood how to craft a narrative. His videos were getting thousands of views, shared across military social media groups and veteran communities. The comments section had become a forum for complaints about lowered standards, diversity quotas, and the decline of military excellence. What Derek didn't realize was that his detailed documentation was creating a digital trail that extended far beyond his intended audience. In a world where information moved instantly across continents and old enemies never stopped watching, some secrets were too dangerous to expose, even accidentally. Zara spent her evening maintenance time cleaning equipment that didn't need cleaning, a ritual that helped calm her mind while she planned her next moves. She had noticed Cross's increased attention, Reed's growing suspicion, and Derek's escalating campaign. The careful balance she had maintained for 3 months was beginning to shift, and she could feel the walls of her constructed identity starting to crack. In her locked footlocker, beneath regulation uniforms and standard equipment, lay a small case containing items that told the real story of Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood. Custom ammunition loaded to her exact specifications, a scope adjustment, tool designed for a rifle she no longer carried, and a single photograph of 3 soldiers standing in front of a helicopter, their faces young and confident, unaware that 2 of them would be dead within the month. The warning bells in her mind were growing louder. The night training exercise began at 2,200 hours, when most of Fort Sterling had settled into the quiet rhythm of evening routines. But for the Advanced Marksmanship Program, darkness was when real snipers proved their worth. Night vision scopes, thermal imaging, and the ability to read shadows and movement in conditions that rendered most soldiers helpless. These were the skills that separated elite marksmen from weekend hunters. Zara moved through the pre-mission briefing with the same carefully cultivated confusion she had perfected over 3 months of deception. Master Sergeant Reed explained the exercise parameters: locate and engage targets at unknown distances using night vision equipment, while avoiding detection by roving patrol units played by other trainees. "This is where we separate the wheat from the chaff," Derek announced to his ever-present phone camera, broadcasting live to his growing audience of military enthusiasts and critics. "Night operations require instincts you can't learn from a manual. Either you have the hunter's mind, or you're just another target waiting to be found." Derek's confidence was well-founded. Night operations were his specialty, inherited from His brother Kevin, who had been legendary for his ability to move unseen through hostile territory. The Lawson brothers had grown up hunting in the dense forests of Montana, learning to read signs invisible to city-raised soldiers, developing the patience that came from hours spent motionless in a tree stand waiting for the perfect shot. What Derek didn't know was that while he had learned to hunt deer and elk in the familiar terrain of home, Zara had learned to hunt human predators in environments where mistakes meant death for entire units. Captain Cross observed the equipment distribution. With the analytical mind that had made him one of the Army's youngest intelligence officers. Each trainee received standard night vision gear, but Cross noted how Zara examined her equipment with the thoroughness of someone checking life support systems rather than training aids. Her fingers moved across the adjustment controls with muscle memory that suggested extensive field use. "Blackwood," Cross called out, approaching her position. "How's your experience with night vision equipment?" It was a test question, carefully crafted to probe the gaps in her official record. According to her file, Zara's previous assignments had been standard support roles that wouldn't have required extensive night vision training. "Basic familiarity, sir," Zara replied, her voice carrying just the right note of uncertainty. "We covered it in advanced individual training, but I've never used it in the field." The lie came easily, practiced through months of careful deception. The truth was that she had spent more time behind night vision scopes than most snipers saw in their entire careers. She had learned to read thermal signatures like poetry, to distinguish between human movement and wind-blown vegetation, to identify threats in conditions where visibility was measured in feet rather than yards. Cross nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. Something about her equipment handling contradicted her words. The way she adjusted the interpupillary distance suggested someone who had done it hundreds of times. The way she checked the infrared illuminator indicated knowledge that came from practical application, not classroom instruction. The exercise area covered 2 square miles of rugged terrain that mimicked the environments where real snipers operated. Rocky outcroppings provided concealment, dense vegetation offered camouflage, and elevation changes created the kind of challenging shooting angles that separated competent marksmen from legends. Derek positioned himself at the highest available vantage point, using terrain analysis skills learned from his brother's teachings. From his position, he could observe multiple approach routes while remaining concealed from the roving patrols. His night vision scope revealed the exercise area in the green-tinted clarity that had become second nature through months of training. "Establishing Overwatch position," he reported into his throat microphone, his voice carrying the professional competence that had earned him respect from instructors and trainees alike. "I have visual on multiple targets and good concealment from patrol routes." Other trainees scattered across the exercise area with varying degrees of skill and confidence. Some moved like the infantry soldiers they were, competent but obvious to anyone with training in stealth movement. Others showed the natural aptitude that suggested promising sniper potential. Zara appeared to struggle with basic movement, her progress slow and noisy enough to draw attention from the roving patrols. She stumbled over obstacles that should have been visible through her night vision equipment, used her illuminator unnecessarily, and generally behaved like someone who had never operated in darkness before. But her apparently clumsy movement followed a pattern that would have impressed any reconnaissance specialist who understood what they were seeing. Each stumble took her deeper into concealment. Each use of the illuminator revealed information about patrol routes and timing, and her seemingly random direction changes were actually a textbook approach to a position that offered superior fields of fire. Derek's first shot was clean and professional, engaging a target at 400 meters with the kind of precision that justified his place in the program. His follow-up shots were equally competent, methodical, and effective. Through his scope, he watched other trainees attempting to locate and engage targets with varying degrees of success, Then he swung his scope toward Zara's last known position, expecting to find her still struggling with basic equipment operation. Instead, he found empty terrain. Where the hell did she go? Derek muttered, scanning the area where Zara had been visible just minutes earlier. His night vision revealed nothing but rocks and vegetation. No sign of the struggling trainee who should have been easy to track. Master Sergeant Reed, monitoring the exercise from the command post, had been watching Zara's progress through multiple observation points. What she saw contradicted everything she thought she knew about the failing trainee. Zara had vanished from visible observation with the skill of someone who understood advanced camouflage and concealment techniques. More troubling, thermal imaging revealed a heat signature moving through the exercise area with purpose and stealth. That belonged in advanced special operations training, not basic marksmanship instruction. "Cross," Reed called over the radio. "Are you seeing this on thermal?" Grid reference 347 to 892. Cross adjusted his monitoring equipment and focused on the 4P7 to 892. Cross adjusted his monitoring equipment and focused on this monitoring equipment and focused on the Sunset 47 to 7 to 892. Coordinates Reed had provided. The thermal signature moving through that area displayed movement patterns that triggered his intelligence training. This wasn't a struggling trainee. This was someone with extensive field experience operating in combat conditions. "That's impossible," Cross said, more to himself than to Reed. "According to her file, she's never been deployed to combat zones." The impossible became undeniable when Zara's first shot broke the night silence. The target she engaged was at 600 meters, positioned in a location that required complex ballistic calculations to account for elevation, wind drift, and the thermal effects that altered bullet trajectory in night conditions. It was a shot that most of the program's trainees couldn't make in daylight, let alone in darkness. The shot was perfect. Derek's thermal scope caught the muzzle flash, and he swung toward the position with the hunter's instinct inherited from his brother. But by the time his scope settled on the area, there was nothing to see. Zara had fired and moved with the fluid precision of someone for whom such tactics were muscle memory. Her second shot came from a completely different position, 200 meters from her first firing point. Another difficult target, another perfect hit. Derek began to understand that he was watching something that didn't match anything in his experience or expectation. "Command, this is Lawson," Derek reported over the radio, his voice tight with confusion and something approaching concern. "I'm observing shots from trainee Blackwood that are unusual. Request confirmation of target assessment." Reed's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed, Lawson. All shots from Blackwood's position have been center mass hits. Repeat, all shots have been perfect." The exercise continued for another hour, during which Zara demonstrated capabilities that belonged in special operations rather than basic training. She moved unseen through terrain that challenged experienced soldiers, engaged targets at distances that tested the limits of her equipment, and displayed tactical awareness that suggested extensive combat experience. When the exercise ended and trainees returned to the assembly area, Derek confronted Zara with barely controlled emotion. His phone camera was rolling, documenting what he saw as evidence of deception on a massive scale. "That was interesting shooting, Blackwood," Derek said, his voice carrying undertones that his audience would recognize as barely contained outrage. "Funny how you went from missing barn doors to making shots that most of us couldn't duplicate." Zara's response was perfect in its apparent confusion and embarrassment. "I guess the night vision helped me focus better. Maybe I just see better in the dark." It was exactly the kind of innocent explanation that someone might offer if they had genuinely surprised themselves with unexpected competence. But Derek's suspicions had crystallized into certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. Captain Cross and Master Sergeant Reed exchanged glances that spoke volumes about shared concerns and unanswered questions. The night exercise had revealed capabilities that contradicted every assumption they had made about Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood. More troubling, it had raised questions about what else she might be hiding, and why someone with her apparent skills would choose to conceal them. As the trainees cleaned their equipment and prepared for debriefing, Zara felt the familiar weight of exposure beginning to settle on her shoulders. She had allowed instinct to override caution, had demonstrated skills that belonged to another identity in another life. The carefully constructed facade of incompetence was cracking, and each crack revealed glimpses of the legendary sniper she had once been. In her barracks that night, Zara stared at the photograph hidden in her footlocker. 3 young soldiers standing beside a helicopter, their faces bright with the confidence of people who believed they were invincible. Staff Sergeant Kevin Lawson stood in the center, his arm around his best friend Lieutenant Marcus Webb. On the right, barely visible in the shadow of the rotor blade, stood the woman they had called Ghost, the sniper whose legend would outlive them all. The warning bells were no longer whispers. They were alarms. The viral video that would change everything was uploaded at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, when Derek Lawson's insomnia and obsessive need to document what he saw as systematic military corruption finally converged into digital ammunition. The video, titled "Exposed: How Military Standards Have Collapsed," featured carefully edited footage from the night exercise, Derek's commentary, and enough personal information about Zara to make her a target for anyone with access to social media. "What you're about to see will shock you." Derek spoke directly into his phone camera, his face lit by the harsh glare of his barracks desk lamp. His voice carried the righteous anger of someone who believed he was exposing a conspiracy that threatened everything he held sacred. 3 months of documented failure, then suddenly perfect shots in conditions that challenge experienced snipers. This isn't improvement. This is deception on a massive scale. The video included thermal footage Derek had recorded during the exercise, showing Zara's movement patterns overlaid with his commentary about impossible skill demonstrations. He had enhanced the audio to capture her breathing patterns, zoomed in on her equipment handling, and provided frame-by-frame analysis that he claimed proved deliberate deception. Within 6 hours, the video had been shared across military social media groups, veteran forums, and political channels that used military issues to advance broader narratives about declining standards. The comment section became a battlefield of opinions about military readiness, diversity policies, and the fundamental question of who belonged in elite programs. But Derek's desire for viral fame had led him to include details that went far beyond military training. He had filmed Zara's barracks assignment, her duty schedule, her vehicle in the parking lot, and enough identifying information to create a comprehensive profile of her daily routine. What he intended as evidence of institutional failure had become a surveillance package that anyone could use to locate Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood. Master Sergeant Reed discovered the video during her morning routine of monitoring social media for security issues that might affect her trainees. What she saw made her blood run cold, not just because of the privacy violations and the potential damage to Zara's career, but because of the professional quality of Derek's surveillance and the level of detail he had compiled. "Captain Cross," Reed called over the secure phone line that connected their offices, "we have a serious problem. Derek Lawson has published detailed surveillance of trainee Blackwood across multiple social media platforms. This goes way beyond harassment. This is a security breach." Cross was already aware of the video, having been alerted by the base's social media monitoring system that flagged any content featuring Fort Sterling personnel. His analysis of Derek's footage had revealed details that troubled him as an intelligence officer, not just the privacy violations, but the implications of what Derek had unknowingly documented. The thermal footage shows movement patterns, That belong in special operations training, Cross told Reed as they reviewed the video together in his office. Either Blackwood has capabilities she's not supposed to have, or Derek has filmed something that shouldn't exist in a basic marksmanship program. The immediate concern was damage control. Derek's video had been viewed over 50,000 times. In its first 12 hours online, shared by military influencers and political commentators who saw it as evidence supporting their existing narratives. The base commander was already fielding calls from higher headquarters demanding explanations for the security breach and the apparent inconsistencies in trainee performance, but Cross's deeper concern was what the video revealed about intelligence gathering. Derek's surveillance techniques were sophisticated, his documentation was thorough, and his analysis showed an understanding of operational security that went beyond what infantry soldiers typically learned. Someone had taught Derek how to conduct surveillance like a professional. Zara first learned about the video when Corporal Walsh approached her during morning chow, her expression carrying the uncomfortable mix of excitement and sympathy that came from being close to drama without being directly involved. "You need to see this," Walsh said, holding out her phone with Derek's video cued to the section showing Zara's night exercise performance. Derek posted everything online. I mean, everything. Watching herself through Derek's camera felt like looking at a crime scene photo. Every movement she had made, every technique she had used, every moment where instinct had overridden caution was now documented and broadcast to anyone with internet access. The careful balance she had maintained for 3 years was shattered. Her location and identity exposed to the world. But what terrified her most was seeing her own face, clearly visible in the thermal footage, enhanced and highlighted in Derek's analysis. After 3 years of hiding, of careful anonymity, of building a life where she could disappear into the background, she was now the subject of viral content that would be seen by thousands of people across multiple continents. The confrontation came during the afternoon training session, when Derek arrived with a crowd of supporters who had been energized by the online response to his video. His phone was already recording as he approached Zara's position on the firing line, his expression showing the confidence of someone who believed justice was finally being served. "So Blackwood," Derek announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent the morning being praised as a whistleblower by his online followers. Ready to explain how someone who couldn't hit a target last week is suddenly Annie Oakley when the cameras are rolling. The circle of trainees that formed around them was larger than usual, drawn by the viral fame of Derek's documentation and the promise of witnessing whatever came next. Phones emerged from pockets as Derek's followers prepared to document the next chapter in what they saw as an ongoing expose of military corruption. Zara's response was measured, her voice carrying the calm control that had once allowed her to coordinate complex operations while under enemy fire. "I've been working hard to improve, Sergeant Lawson. Maybe the night vision equipment helped me focus better." It was the same explanation she had offered before, but Derek was no longer interested in innocent explanations. His online audience was hungry for confrontation. His viral success was feeding an ego that had been wounded by months of watching Zara receive what he saw as undeserved protection, and his grief-driven need for justice was finally finding a target worthy of his anger. "Working hard?" Derek's laugh was bitter and theatrical, performed for the cameras that were documenting every moment. "Lady, I've got 3 months of footage showing you couldn't hit the ground if you fell off a building. Then suddenly you're making shots that belong in sniper school highlights. That's not improvement. That's fraud." The word fraud hung in the air like gunsmoke, dangerous and inflammatory. Master Sergeant Reed moved quickly to intervene, recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond anything that could be contained through normal disciplinary channels. "Both of you stand down," Reed commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had controlled training exercises for over a decade. "Lawson, you're out of line." Blackwood, return to your position. But Derek's momentum was building, fed by the adrenaline of viral fame and the support of his growing audience. His next words would prove to be the catalyst that transformed harassment into something far more dangerous. "No, ma'am, I'm not standing down," Derek replied, his phone camera capturing every moment for posterity. The American people deserve to know how their tax dollars are being wasted on people who lie about their qualifications. And they deserve to know why certain people get special treatment while real soldiers get ignored. Captain Cross arrived at the firing line in time to hear Derek's public challenge to military authority. BROADCAST left to thousands of viewers across social media platforms. What Cross saw was no longer a training dispute or even a harassment issue. It was a security breach that had spiraled into a public relations crisis with implications that extended far beyond Fort Sterling. "Sergeant Lawson," Cross said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded respect in classified briefing rooms. "You will cease this broadcast immediately and report to my office. That's an order." Derek's response revealed how completely his perspective had been warped by viral fame and online validation. "With respect, sir, the American people have a right to know what's happening in their military. This isn't about personal grudges. This is about accountability." The live stream continued, broadcasting Derek's defiance to an audience that was growing by the minute. Comments flooded in from viewers who saw Derek as a hero exposing corruption, others who recognized the situation as dangerous escalation, and a few whose knowledge of military operations made them ask questions that no one wanted to answer. As the confrontation continued to escalate, Zara felt the familiar weight of operational planning settling into her mind. She was analyzing escape routes, identifying potential threats, calculating the resources she would need to disappear again if the situation continued to deteriorate. The skills that had kept her alive in combat zones were automatically engaging as her carefully constructed civilian life began to collapse around her. But escape would mean abandoning the life she had built, the sense of purpose she had found in serving her country even in a diminished capacity, and the hope that she could somehow find peace after years of running from the consequences of being too good at her job. Asterisk. The viral video had done more than expose her inconsistent performance. It had painted a target on her back that was visible to anyone with the knowledge and resources to act on the information Derek had unknowingly provided. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, the secure communication that would seal Zara's fate was transmitted at 13:47 hours Eastern Standard Time, routing through military networks that Derek Lawson believed were impenetrable. His frustration with what he saw as a cover-up had reached the breaking point after Captain Cross's order to cease his broadcasts, and his response was to escalate beyond the chain of command at Fort Sterling. Derek's report, filed through the Inspector General's complaint system, was a masterpiece of documentation that included everything he had compiled over 3 months of surveillance. High-resolution photographs showing Zara's equipment arrangements, detailed analysis of her shooting patterns, thermal imagery from the night exercise, and most damaging of all, a comprehensive timeline of her daily routines that read like a targeting package prepared by professional intelligence operatives. Subject: fraudulent training performance and command cover-up. Derek typed into the secure military communication system, his fingers moving with the same precision he brought to rifle maintenance. Request immediate investigation into Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood, Advanced Marksmanship Program, Fort Sterling, Nevada. Evidence suggests deliberate deception regarding qualifications and capabilities, with apparent command-level protection preventing proper disciplinary action. What Derek didn't know was that certain keywords in his report would trigger automated alerts in intelligence systems that had been monitoring military communications for any mention of exceptional marksmanship capabilities. Foreign intelligence services had long-running programs designed to identify and track elite snipers, understanding that such individuals often possessed knowledge and experience that could be valuable or dangerous in the wrong hands. The report included precise geographic coordinates for Zara's barracks, training schedule, vehicle registration, and enough personal information to build a complete operational profile. Derek's intention was to force higher headquarters to investigate what he saw as corruption and fraud. What he had actually done was provide a comprehensive intelligence package to anyone with access to compromised military communication networks. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes, the base inspector general, received Derek's report along with the attached video evidence and supporting documentation. Her initial review revealed a level of detail that raised immediate concerns about operational security and the methods Derek had used to compile his evidence. "This isn't a complaint," Hayes told her assistant as she reviewed Derek's submission. "This is surveillance. Look at these photographs." He's documented her movements with the precision of a counterintelligence operation. Where did an infantry sergeant learn to conduct this kind of analysis? The answer to that question would have troubled Hayes even more if she had known it. Derek's surveillance techniques had been learned from his brother Kevin, who had been trained in reconnaissance and intelligence gathering during his deployment to Afghanistan. Kevin had shared those skills during their conversations, teaching Derek to notice details that most soldiers overlooked, to document patterns that revealed operational vulnerabilities. But Kevin had been dead for 2 years, killed in a helicopter crash that Derek still believed was caused by mechanical failure rather than enemy action. The irony was that Derek was using skills his brother had taught him to unknowingly expose the same person whose operations had led to Kevin's death. Captain Cross discovered the security breach during his routine review of communication logs that mentioned personnel under his command. Seeing Derek's report routing through multiple military networks, complete with classified training footage and detailed personal information, triggered every alarm his intelligence training had installed. "Master Sergeant Reed," Cross called over the secure line that connected their offices. "We have a major problem. Derek's harassment campaign just became a national security issue." Reed arrived at Cross's office to find him studying multiple computer screens displaying network traffic analysis, communication routing logs, and threat assessment matrices that belonged in classified briefing rooms rather than training command offices. Derek filed his complaint through systems that have been compromised by foreign intelligence services, Cross explained, his voice tight with the controlled urgency that came from recognizing threats that most people couldn't see. Every piece of personal information he included about Blackwood is now potentially available to hostile actors. The scope of the security breach was staggering. Derek's report had been transmitted through communication networks that intelligence agencies knew were monitored by adversaries. His detailed documentation of Zara's capabilities, combined with the precise location and scheduling information he had included, created a perfect storm of exposure for someone who had spent 3 years hiding from international attention. "How compromised are we talking about?" Reed asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer would be worse than she wanted to hear. "Assume everything Derek documented is now known to people who have been looking for exactly this kind of information," Cross replied. "Blackwood's location, her capabilities, her daily routine, her training schedule, it's all potentially compromised." Master Sergeant Reed felt the weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders like lead blankets. Her job was to train snipers and protect her personnel, but Derek's actions had created a situation that extended far beyond anything covered in training manuals or standard operating procedures. The first indication that foreign intelligence services had noticed Derek's report came through channels that most military personnel never knew existed. The National Security Agency's automated monitoring systems detected increased electronic surveillance activity focused on the Fort Sterling area. suggesting that someone with sophisticated resources was taking interest in the base and its personnel. Captain Cross received the classified briefing at 1800 hours, delivered by courier in a manila envelope, marked with security classifications that required him to read the contents in a secured room with no electronic devices present. What he learned made his blood run cold. Intelligence agencies had identified communication intercepts suggesting that terrorist organizations with long memories and patient planning capabilities had become aware of unusual sniper activity at a U.S. training facility. The intercepts mentioned code names that hadn't been used since Afghanistan operations 3 years ago, including references to a legendary sniper known as Ghost who had cost enemy forces millions of dollars and failed operations. The briefing included satellite imagery showing increased activity at known terrorist training camps, financial intelligence indicating large money transfers to operational cells in North America, and communication intercepts that suggested a major operation was being planned with Fort Sterling as the target. Cross's hands trembled slightly as he read the final paragraph of the briefing. Recommend immediate relocation of personnel identified in compromised communications. Threat level assessed as imminent and credible. Enemy forces have demonstrated capability and motivation for direct action against high-value targets. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Derek's campaign to expose what he saw as fraud and corruption had actually exposed one of the military's most valuable assets to the enemies she had spent years hiding from. His detailed documentation, intended to force accountability and maintain standards, had provided terrorists with everything they needed to plan an assassination that would eliminate the sniper who had caused them so much damage. When Cross returned to his office, he found Zara waiting outside his door with the patient stillness that he was beginning to recognize as characteristic of someone accustomed to life-or-death situations. She wasn't there by coincidence. Her own instincts had been warning her that Derek's escalation had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Captain," Zara said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that suggested she already knew the conversation they were about to have. "I think we need to talk." Cross studied the woman who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 months, seeing her clearly for the first time. The way she stood suggested someone comfortable with violence. The way she observed her surroundings indicated training that went far beyond basic military service, and the way she had positioned herself near his office showed tactical awareness that belonged in special operations. "Staff Sergeant Blackwood," Cross said, using her rank with new understanding of what it might represent. "I believe we do. And I think it's time you told me who you really are." The conversation that followed would determine whether the military could protect one of its most valuable assets, or whether Derek's viral campaign for accountability would result in the death of the legendary sniper who had been hiding among them all along. Outside Cross's office, the base continued its normal operations, unaware that foreign intelligence services were already moving assets into position for an operation that would test every security measure Fort Sterling had in place. Derek's documentation had provided them with everything they needed except one crucial detail. They still didn't know that Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood was actually the ghost of Kunar, the sniper whose legend had outlived the soldiers who had served beside her. That detail would make the coming confrontation far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The secure phone in Cross's office rang with the tone that indicated classified communications. The hunt for the ghost had begun. The confession that would change everything began not with dramatic revelation, but with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had been running for too long. Zara sat across from Captain Cross in his secure office, her hands folded in her lap with the stillness that came from years of learning to control involuntary movements that could give away a sniper's position. "My real name is Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez," she said, using a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years. "But the people hunting me know me as the ghost of Kunar. I was the primary sniper for Task Force Reaper, 3rd Special Operations Battalion. Afghanistan, 2019 to 2022. Cross had suspected something significant, but the reality exceeded his worst fears. Task Force Reaper had been legendary in intelligence circles, a unit that had conducted operations so classified that most of their achievements would never be officially acknowledged. The ghost of Kunar was more than legendary, she was mythical. Credited with eliminating high-value targets that had seemed untouchable. Jesus Christ, cross-breathed, understanding immediately why Zara had been hiding and what Derek's exposure meant. You're the sniper who took out the entire leadership of the Coast Network, the operation that saved the Kabul evacuation. Zara nodded, her expression carrying the weight of memories that had cost her everything she had once cared about. 47 confirmed kills over 3 years. Mostly high-value targets, terrorist leaders, bomb makers, the kind of people who plan attacks on civilians. Each shot was precision, each mission was critical, and each success made me more valuable to our side and more wanted by theirs. The scope of her accomplishments was staggering. Cross had read classified after-action reports that mentioned Ghost's operations, but he had never imagined he would meet the person behind the legend. Her work had prevented terrorist attacks across multiple countries, disrupted financing networks that funded international terrorism, and eliminated individuals whose deaths had saved hundreds of innocent lives. The last mission was supposed to be routine, Zara continued, her voice carrying the controlled emotion of someone who had learned to compartmentalize trauma. Intelligence had identified a meeting of regional terrorist leaders in a compound near the Pakistani border. High-value targets who had been planning coordinated attacks on American interests. My job was overwatch and elimination of specific individuals who couldn't be captured alive. Cross understood the implications immediately. Missions like that were planned with surgical precision, involving multiple intelligence agencies and international cooperation. When such operations went wrong, the consequences extended far beyond individual casualties. What happened? Cross asked, though his intelligence training had already begun calculating the possibilities that could lead a special operations sniper to hide her identity for 3 years. The compound was a trap, Zara said, her hands unconsciously adjusting an imaginary rifle scope with movements so automatic they seemed involuntary. Intelligence was compromised. The terrorists knew we were coming, knew our approach routes, knew our personnel assignments. They had prepared defenses specifically designed to counter our operational methods. The betrayal had been comprehensive and devastating. Someone with access to classified mission planning had provided detailed information to the enemy, allowing them to prepare countermeasures that turned a routine elimination operation into a carefully orchestrated ambush designed to destroy the entire task force. The helicopter carrying my support team was shot down 6 minutes after insertion. Zara continued, her voice growing quieter as she relived events that still woke her from sleep 3 years later. 8 men died in the crash, including the pilot who had been trying to extract wounded personnel when they were hit by a surface-to-air missile. Cross felt the weight of command responsibility that every officer carried when good soldiers died, following orders that seemed reasonable until they proved fatal. 8 families had received visits from chaplains because someone's intelligence had been wrong, or worse, deliberately compromised. I was alone for 36 hours, Zara said, her eyes focused on something beyond the walls of Cross's office. Enemy forces searching for survivors, trying to capture rather than kill because they knew how valuable intelligence from task force personnel would be. I had to make shots I had never trained for, in conditions that should have been impossible, just to stay alive long enough for extraction. The extraction had come, but not before Zara had eliminated 12 enemy combatants in running battles across hostile terrain. Her ammunition had run out after the 8th kill, forcing her to use captured weapons and tactics that belonged in survival courses rather than sniper training. When the rescue helicopter finally reached her position, she had been found unconscious from blood loss and dehydration, still clutching a rifle she had taken from the last terrorist she had killed in hand-to-hand combat. The investigation afterward revealed that our intelligence had been compromised by someone with access to mission planning. Zara explained, her voice carrying the bitter knowledge that her team had been betrayed by someone they should have been able to trust. But the compromise went deeper than tactical information. Financial records, personal details, family information, everything about Task Force Reaper personnel had been leaked to terrorist networks. The implications were staggering. The enemy hadn't just gained tactical advantages, they had acquired personal information that made every member of the task force a target for retaliation. Addresses, family members, personal routines, everything needed to plan assassination operations against soldiers and their loved ones. They put bounties on our heads, Zara said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been running from professional killers for 3 years. Not just military bounties, personal ones. Terrorist organizations started funding operations specifically designed to eliminate task force survivors and their families. The kind of patient, well-funded operations that can follow people anywhere in the world. Cross understood why Zara had chosen to hide rather than rely on official protection. Witness protection programs were designed to hide civilians from criminals, not to conceal special operations personnel from international terrorist networks with unlimited funding and patient planning capabilities. How many others? Cross asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Of the 12 task force survivors, 7 are dead, Zara replied, her voice carrying the weight of friends lost to enemies who never forgot and never forgave. Car accidents that weren't accidents, home invasions that were too professional to be random, disappearances that left no evidence except empty houses and grieving families. The systematic elimination of Task Force Reaper survivors had been conducted with the precision of military operations, suggesting that the enemy had access to resources and intelligence that went far beyond typical terrorist capabilities. Each death had been carefully planned to look like civilian tragedy rather than military retaliation. So you became Zara Blackwood and decided to hide by failing sniper training, Cross said, understanding the logic that had led her to choose invisibility over protection. I became the worst marksman in military history, Zara confirmed, her voice carrying grim satisfaction at the success of her deception. Someone so incompetent that no one would look twice, so unremarkable that I could disappear into the background of military routine. It worked for 3 years, until Derek Lawson's viral campaign for accountability had exposed her location, her capabilities, and enough personal information to allow the enemies who had been hunting her to finally close the net they had been patiently weaving. Derek's documentation has been compromised, Cross said, sharing the intelligence briefing he had received. Enemy forces are moving assets into position for an operation targeting Fort Sterling. They know you're here, they know your routine, and they know exactly where to find you. Zara nodded with the calm acceptance of someone who had always known. This moment would come. How long do we have? Intelligence estimates 72 hours, maybe less. They've been patient for 3 years, but patient predators are the most dangerous kind. The base continued its normal operations outside Cross's office, unaware that the routine training mission had become a defensive operation against enemies who had spent 3 years planning their revenge against the ghost of Kunar. The breaking point had arrived, and there would be no more hiding. The photograph that would shatter Derek Lawson's world was contained in a classified file that Captain Cross retrieved from his secure safe with hands that trembled slightly from the weight of what he was about to reveal. The image, taken 3 years ago at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan, showed 12 soldiers standing beside a CH-47 Chinook helicopter, their faces bright with the confidence of people who believed they were invincible. This is Task Force Reaper, Cross said, placing the photograph on his desk where both he and Zara could see it clearly. Taken 2 days before the mission that got most of them killed. Zara's breath caught as she saw faces she remembered from dreams that still woke her in cold sweats. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the team leader whose tactical brilliance had kept them alive through dozens of impossible missions. Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez, the communications specialist who could establish contact with headquarters from anywhere on Earth. And there, standing third from the left with his arm around his best friend, was Staff Sergeant Kevin Lawson. Kevin was our reconnaissance specialist, Zara said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of memory and loss. Best soldier I ever worked with. He could read terrain like poetry, spot threats that no one else saw, and move through hostile territory like he was invisible. Derek has his eyes. Cross studied the photograph with the analytical mind that had made him valuable as an intelligence officer. According to the mission reports, Staff Sergeant Lawson was killed in the helicopter crash during the extraction operation. The same crash that killed 7 other members of your support team. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Derek had been using surveillance techniques taught to him by his brother Kevin to unknowingly expose the very person whose operations had led to Kevin's death. His campaign for military accountability had been fueled by grief for a brother whose sacrifice he didn't understand, directed at the woman whose legend had been built on missions that Kevin had helped make possible. Kevin volunteered for the extraction, Zara continued, her eyes fixed on the photograph with the intensity of someone trying to memorize details that time might fade. The original plan called for ground extraction, but the enemy response was too heavy. Kevin convinced Lieutenant Webb to authorize helicopter extraction because he knew I was wounded and running out of ammunition. The extraction had been Kevin's idea, his analysis of the tactical situation, his recommendation that saved Zara's life at the cost of his own. The helicopter that crashed had been carrying soldiers who had volunteered to risk their lives to save a teammate, displaying the kind of loyalty and courage that define special operations units. Derek doesn't know any of this, Cross said, understanding the tragic irony that had driven Derek's harassment campaign. He thinks his brother died in a routine training accident. The mission details are classified at levels he doesn't have access to. The official story given to families had been necessarily vague, limited to general statements about helicopter accidents during training exercises. The classified nature of Task Force Reaper's operations meant that surviving family members couldn't be told the truth about how their loved ones had died, couldn't understand that their sacrifice had prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of innocent people. Kevin saved my life, Zara said, her voice breaking with emotion she had been suppressing for 3 years. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was his voice on the radio, coordinating my extraction while enemy fire was tearing his helicopter apart. He died trying to bring me home. Cross felt the weight of command decisions that had consequences extending far beyond immediate tactical concerns. Every classified operation created ripples of grief and misunderstanding that affected families who could never know the truth about their losses, who were left to create their own explanations for tragedies they couldn't comprehend. The secure communication system in Cross's office chimed with the tone that indicated urgent classified traffic. The message, transmitted through channels that required multiple authentication codes, contained intelligence updates that made the situation even more desperate than Cross had feared. Enemy assets have been identified entering the United States through multiple border crossings, Cross read. From the classified update, financial intelligence indicates significant resources being directed toward operational planning. Communication intercepts suggest target acquisition phase is complete and operational phase has begun. The hunt for the ghost of Kunar had moved from intelligence gathering to active operation. Somewhere in the darkness beyond Fort Sterling, professional killers were moving into position for an assault that had been 3 years in the planning. funded by terrorist organizations that never forgot and never forgave. "We need to bring Derek into this," Zara said, her voice carrying the tactical clarity that had once allowed her to coordinate complex operations under extreme stress. "His harassment has exposed my location, but his surveillance skills could be valuable for defensive operations. He knows how to gather intelligence, how to spot threats, how to document patterns that others miss." Cross understood the strategic logic, but questioned whether Derek's emotional state would allow him to process the truth about his brother's death and the woman he'd been tormenting for 3 months. Grief had a way of distorting perception, making rational analysis difficult when personal loss was involved. "Derek's going to have to understand that his campaign for accountability has put the entire base at risk," Cross said, his voice carrying the authority of command decisions that couldn't be delayed. "The enemy knows we're here, they know our defensive capabilities, and they know exactly where to find their primary target." The conversation was interrupted by urgent knocking on Cross's office door. Master Sergeant Reed entered without waiting for permission, her expression showing the controlled urgency that came from recognizing threats that required immediate action. "Sir, we have a problem," Reed announced, her voice tight with professional concern. "Derek Lawson is missing from his assigned duties. His bunk hasn't been slept in, his equipment is gone, and his vehicle is missing from the parking area." The implications hit Cross like a physical blow. Derek's disappearance meant either that he had realized the danger his actions had created and was running from consequences he couldn't face, or worse, that enemy forces had already begun their operation by eliminating the person whose documentation had made their mission possible. "How long has he been missing?" Cross asked, already calculating response options and threat assessments. "Last confirmed sighting was 03:00 hours during his social media broadcast," Reed replied. "Base security has been searching for 4 hours without finding any trace of his location." Zara stood with the fluid motion of someone shifting from civilian to warrior, her entire demeanor changing as tactical instincts overrode emotional considerations. "They've taken him," she said, with the certainty of someone who understood how professional operations were conducted. "Derek's surveillance made him a liability once they identified me. They'll use him for intelligence about base defenses, then eliminate him when he's no longer useful." The realization that Derek might already be in enemy hands transformed the situation from defensive planning to active crisis management. If terrorists had captured someone with detailed knowledge of Fort Sterling's security measures and defensive capabilities, every assumption about their operational timeline would need to be revised. "Intelligence estimates were wrong," Cross said, understanding that enemy patience had been replaced by operational urgency. "They're not waiting 72 hours. They're moving now." Outside Cross's office, Fort Sterling continued its normal operations, unaware that the base was already under surveillance by enemies who had spent 3 years planning their assault. The ghost of Kunar had been found, her protector was missing, and the final confrontation was about to begin. The hunting season was over. The war had started. The abandoned warehouse 15 miles from Fort Sterling had become Derek Lawson's prison and classroom, where professional interrogators were teaching him lessons about the consequences of viral fame and the real cost of military accountability. The zip ties around his wrists had cut off circulation to his hands hours ago, but Derek's attention was focused on the photographs spread across the metal table in front of him. "Your brother was a remarkable soldier," said the man who had introduced himself only as Hassan, his English accent-free despite features that suggested Middle Eastern heritage. "Staff Sergeant Kevin Lawson, 3rd Special Operations Battalion, recipient of the Silver Star and Purple Heart. We have studied his service record extensively." Derek stared at the images with growing confusion and horror. These weren't the official photographs from Kevin's funeral, the carefully sanitized images that had accompanied the notification of death during a training exercise. These were operational photographs showing Kevin in full combat gear, carrying weapons that belonged in special operations rather than routine military service. Kevin was killed in a helicopter accident during training, Derek said, his voice carrying the desperate certainty of someone whose entire understanding of reality was being systematically dismantled. He was stationed in Germany, working on maintenance operations. He never saw combat. Hassan's smile was patient and cruel, the expression of someone who enjoyed revealing uncomfortable truths to people who had built their lives on comfortable lies. Your brother died in Afghanistan during a classified operation to extract the most dangerous sniper the American military has ever produced. He volunteered for a mission that saved the life of the woman you have been documenting so thoroughly. The photographs told a story that contradicted everything Derek had been told about his brother's death. Kevin in Afghanistan, Kevin with Task Force Reaper, Kevin standing beside the legendary ghost of Kunar, whose identity Derek had been unknowingly exposing for 3 months. The woman you call Zara Blackwood is actually Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez. Hassan continued, enjoying Derek's growing comprehension and horror. The ghost of Kunar, responsible for 47 confirmed eliminations of our operational personnel. Your brother died trying to save the sniper who cost our organization over $50 million in failed operations. Derek's world shattered like glass hitting concrete. Every assumption he had made about Kevin's death, every belief he had built about military service and sacrifice, every justification he had used for his campaign against Zara was revealed as tragic misunderstanding, built on classified information he had never been allowed to access. "You're lying," Derek said, though his voice lacked conviction even as he spoke the words. The photographs were too detailed to be fabricated, the operational information too specific to be fiction. Kevin would have told me if he was involved in special operations. Your brother couldn't tell you anything because everything he did was classified at levels that required secrecy even from family members, Hassan explained with the patience of someone who had conducted hundreds of interrogations. Kevin Lawson was one of the finest reconnaissance specialists we ever encountered. His reports about terrain conditions and enemy movements were so accurate that we began planning operations specifically designed to counter his intelligence gathering. The irony deepened as Hassan continued his revelation. Kevin's excellence as a soldier had made him a target for the same terrorist organizations that were now hunting Zara. His detailed reconnaissance reports had disrupted so many enemy operations that eliminating him had become a strategic priority. The helicopter crash that killed your brother was not an accident, Hassan said, his words falling like hammer blows on Derek's crumbling understanding. We used a surface-to-air missile to bring down the aircraft that was extracting the ghost. Kevin died because he volunteered to save the life of someone whose existence threatened everything we had built. Derek's grief, which had been focused on Zara for 3 months, suddenly had nowhere to go. The woman he had been tormenting was the reason his brother had died, but she was also the person Kevin had died trying to save. The enemy who had killed. Kevin was sitting across from him, explaining how Derek's own actions had helped them locate their primary target. Your viral documentation has been very helpful, Hassan continued, spreading additional photographs across the table. Base layout, security procedures, personnel schedules, equipment locations, everything we needed to plan an operation that your brother's sacrifice delayed for 3 years. The photographs showed Derek's own surveillance footage, enhanced and analyzed by professional intelligence operatives who had turned his campaign for accountability into a comprehensive assault plan. Every video he had posted, every detail he had documented, every piece of information he had gathered in his quest for justice had been weaponized against the base he was sworn to protect. Kevin died for nothing, Derek said, his voice breaking under the weight of interconnected tragedy that seemed too cruel to be real. He saved someone who was already doomed, and I've spent 3 months helping you finish what you started. Hassan's expression showed something that might have been genuine sympathy, the recognition of grief that transcended political and military boundaries. Your brother died as a soldier, following orders and protecting his teammates. There is honor in that, even when the cause serves our enemies. The admission revealed Hassan's own complexity, suggesting that he understood the human cost of the conflict that had consumed years of his life and the lives of countless others. Professional respect for enemy competence was common among warriors who had spent enough time in combat to recognize courage, regardless of which side displayed it. "What happens now?" Derek asked, though he suspected the answer would be worse than anything he could imagine. "Now you help us complete our mission," Hassan replied, his voice returning to the clinical tone of operational planning. "Your knowledge of base security will ensure our success. Your presence will guarantee that the ghost comes to us instead of running again. And your death will send a message that some operations have consequences that extend across years and continents." Derek understood that he had become bait in a trap designed to lure Zara into a confrontation she couldn't win. His viral campaign for military accountability had made him a tool for enemies who would use his capture to force the ghost of Kunar into making the kind of tactical mistakes that got legends killed. But Hassan had made one crucial error in his psychological manipulation. By revealing the truth about Kevin's death, by showing Derek the honor and sacrifice that had characterized his brother's final mission, Hassan had transformed Derek's grief from misdirected anger into focused purpose. Kevin had died protecting his teammates. Derek had spent 3 months betraying that sacrifice. The realization didn't eliminate his guilt, but it clarified his remaining choices. As Hassan left the warehouse to coordinate the assault on Fort Sterling, Derek began working on the zip ties that bound his wrists, using techniques Kevin had taught him during their survival training sessions. His brother had died as a soldier, following orders and protecting people who mattered. Derek intended to do the same, even if it cost him everything he had left to lose. Outside the warehouse, Hassan's assault team was making final preparations for an operation that would either eliminate the ghost of Kunar or force her to reveal capabilities that would make her an even more valuable target. The final act was about to begin, and Derek Lawson was determined to write a different ending than the one his captors had planned. The emergency briefing at Fort Sterling began at 0600 hours, when the desert sunrise painted the mountains in shades of gold that reminded Zara of mornings in Afghanistan, when the beauty of the landscape had been overshadowed by the certainty that someone would die before sunset. The assembled personnel represented every combat-capable soldier on the base, their faces showing the focused attention that came from understanding they were no longer training for war. They were preparing to fight one. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Richardson announced to the packed briefing room, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in uniform and the weight of intelligence that had kept him awake all night. "We have confirmed intelligence that Fort Sterling is the target of an imminent terrorist assault. The enemy has detailed knowledge of our defensive capabilities, our personnel, and our operational procedures." The revelation sent ripples of tension through the assembled soldiers, but Zara noted with professional approval that none of them showed panic. These were professional soldiers who understood that war sometimes came to places where it wasn't expected, and their job was to be ready regardless of circumstances. Captain Cross stood at the front of the room beside a detailed tactical map that showed Fort Sterling's defensive positions, likely assault routes, and the terrain features that would determine how the coming battle developed. His expression carried the controlled intensity of someone who had moved from intelligence gathering to operational planning. "The primary target is Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, also known as the Ghost of Kunar," Cross announced, his words causing heads to turn toward Zara with expressions ranging from surprise to recognition. "She is one of the most accomplished snipers in military history, and the terrorist organization hunting her has spent 3 years planning this operation." Master Sergeant Reed took over the tactical briefing, her voice carrying the professional competence that had trained hundreds of soldiers over her career. Intelligence indicates enemy strength of approximately 12 to 15 operatives, all with military training and specialized equipment. They have detailed knowledge of our base layout thanks to compromised communications. The source of that compromised intelligence remained unspoken, but Zara could see understanding in the faces of soldiers who had watched Derek's viral campaign develop over the past weeks. The harassment that had seemed like military politics had actually been intelligence gathering that aided enemy operations. Defensive positions have been established at key access points, Reed continued, indicating locations on the tactical map with the precision of someone who had fought in places where tactical mistakes meant friendly casualties. Communications have been secured, ammunition has been distributed, and medical stations have been established for casualty treatment. Lieutenant Martinez, the base's intelligence officer, provided details about enemy capabilities that painted a picture of professional soldiers rather than typical terrorists. These are not suicide bombers or amateur fighters. Intelligence suggests former military personnel with experience in special operations. They have demonstrated patience, sophisticated planning, and access to military-grade equipment. The briefing continued with assignments that placed soldiers in defensive positions, designed to channel enemy assault routes into killing zones where Fort Sterling's advantages in numbers and equipment could be maximized. But Zara understood that defensive strategies were only effective if the enemy followed predictable assault patterns. "They're not coming for a battle," Zara said, standing to address the assembled soldiers with the authority that came from understanding how professional killers operated. "They're coming for an assassination. Everything else is distraction designed to isolate me from protective support." Her words carried the weight of experience earned in places where tactical analysis meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The enemy's 3-year planning timeline suggested patience that went beyond military assault. This was personal vengeance disguised as operational necessity. Colonel Richardson nodded grimly. "Which is why we're not giving them what they expect. Staff Sergeant Vasquez will not be isolated, will not be used as bait, and will not be sacrificed to enemy operations. This base protects its own." The declaration earned murmurs of approval from soldiers who understood that military loyalty extended beyond rank and regulation to fundamental principles about never leaving anyone behind. But Zara also understood that good intentions could be overwhelmed by superior tactics and patient planning. "Sir, with respect, defensive positions won't be enough," Zara said, her voice carrying the tactical clarity that had once allowed her to coordinate complex operations under extreme stress. "The enemy has been planning this operation for 3 years. They know our defensive capabilities, our response procedures, our equipment limitations. They'll have contingencies for everything we can do conventionally." Cross understood the implication. "Immediately. You're suggesting we abandon conventional defensive tactics." "I'm suggesting we use unconventional offensive tactics," Zara replied, her transformation from hidden contractor to warrior becoming complete. "Give me a rifle, give me a spotter, and give me the freedom to hunt instead of hide. Turn their assassination operation into a counter-sniper mission." The proposal reversed every assumption about protective strategy, transforming the hunted into the hunter and the defensive operation into an aggressive counterattack. It was exactly the kind of tactical thinking that had made the Ghost of Kunar legendary, but it also carried risks that extended far beyond individual safety. "Absolutely not," Richardson said immediately. "You're the target, not the solution. Our job is to protect you, not to use you as operational bait." But Master Sergeant Reed, who had watched Zara's capabilities during the night exercise, understood the strategic logic. "Sir, conventional defensive positions assume the enemy will assault fixed locations. If they're planning assassination rather than assault, our defensive preparations become vulnerabilities they can exploit. The debate was interrupted by urgent communication from base security, reporting unusual activity in the surrounding area. Vehicles had been observed in positions that suggested surveillance rather than coincidental presence. Communication intercepts indicated increased radio traffic on frequencies associated with tactical operations. Timeline has been accelerated, Cross announced after reviewing the latest intelligence updates. Enemy forces are in position for immediate assault. Estimated time until operational commencement is less than 4 hours. The morning that had begun with briefings and planning was racing toward afternoon confrontation that would test every tactical decision and strategic assumption. Outside the briefing room, Fort Sterling was transforming from training facility to combat zone, with soldiers taking positions that might determine whether they lived or died before sunset. Zara felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders like equipment she had carried in other places where decisions meant life or death for people she cared about. The choice was no longer between hiding and fighting. It was between passive defense and active engagement. "Give me the mission," she said to Colonel Richardson, her voice carrying the certainty that came from understanding her own capabilities and the enemy's limitations. "Let me do what I was trained to do. Let me be the ghost one more time." The decision Richardson made would determine whether Fort Sterling's defense succeeded or failed, whether the legendary sniper survived or died, and whether Derek Lawson's capture would be used to destroy the woman his brother had died protecting outside the base perimeter. Hassan's assault team was making final preparations for an operation that would either eliminate their primary target or confirm that some legends were too dangerous to challenge directly. The final confrontation was beginning, and both sides understood that only one would survive to tell the story. The attack began at 1347 hours with the subtle precision of a surgeon's scalpel rather than the brutal force of a sledgehammer. Hassan's team had spent 3 years studying American military defensive procedures, and they understood that success lay not in overwhelming firepower but in exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities that came from protecting high-value assets. The first indication of enemy presence was Derek Lawson's voice crackling through Fort Sterling's communication system, broadcast from speakers that had been hacked using equipment Derek himself had unknowingly helped them acquire. His words carried the hollow tone of someone speaking under extreme duress, but also the underlying steel that had characterized the Lawson family for generations. "Fort Sterling Base Command, this is Sergeant Derek Lawson," his voice echoed across the facility, reaching soldiers in defensive positions who recognized the name from weeks of viral controversy. "I am being held by hostile forces approximately 2 miles northeast of the main gate. They have demanded the surrender of Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez in exchange for my release." The psychological warfare was elegant in its simplicity. Derek's capture transformed the tactical situation from defensive operations into a hostage rescue mission, forcing Fort Sterling's defenders to choose between protecting their primary asset and saving one of their own soldiers. It was exactly the kind of moral dilemma that paralyzed decision-making and created opportunities for enemy exploitation. But Derek's next words revealed that Hassan had underestimated the transformation grief and understanding had worked in his prisoner. "Command, be advised that hostile forces consist of 12 operatives with military training and specialized equipment. They are using thermal imaging, night vision, and communication intercept capabilities. Primary assault vector will be from the northeast, with diversionary attacks from the south and west." Colonel Richardson's voice came back immediately over the base communication system. "Sergeant Lawson, what is your status and condition?" "I am secure and providing intelligence voluntarily, sir," Derek replied, his voice carrying the controlled professionalism that his brother Kevin would have recognized. "Hostile leader has identified himself as Hassan al-Rashid, wanted by multiple international law enforcement agencies for terrorist activities. He has confirmed that this operation is personal revenge against the ghost of Kunar. Zara, positioned in the base's highest observation tower with a rifle that felt like greeting an old friend, understood immediately what Derek was doing. His intelligence wasn't just tactical information. It was a distraction that would force Hassan to relocate his command position and adjust his assault timeline. "Derek's buying us time," she said into her throat microphone, speaking to Captain Cross, who was coordinating defensive operations from the command center. "Hassan will have to move his position now that Derek has revealed their location. It gives us approximately 20 minutes to reset our defensive arrangements." Cross's response came back immediately. "Confirmed. All units, adjust defensive positions based on Sergeant Lawson's intelligence. Hostile assault vector from northeast, diversionary attacks from south and west. Prepare for coordinated assault." The 20 minutes Derek had provided were used to transform Fort Sterling's defensive arrangements from reactive positioning to proactive hunter-killer operations. Soldiers moved to positions that would allow them to engage enemy forces during their approach rather than waiting for assault against fixed positions. But Zara's mission was different from conventional defensive operations. Her position in the observation tower provided overwatch for the entire base. But more importantly, it offered clear sightlines to the terrain where Hassan would have to position his assault teams. She was no longer hiding from the legend of the ghost of Kunar. She was becoming it again. The first shots came at 14:09 hours, when Hassan's diversionary teams engaged Fort Sterling's southern defensive positions with automatic weapons fire, designed to draw attention and resources away from the primary assault. The sound of combat echoed across the desert like thunder, familiar and terrifying to anyone who had heard it before. Through her scope, Zara watched enemy movement patterns that confirmed Derek's intelligence and revealed tactical sophistication that went beyond typical terrorist operations. These were professional soldiers executing a plan they had rehearsed extensively, moving with coordination that suggested excellent training and communication. Her first shot eliminated the enemy communication specialist at 847 meters, a target that required complex calculations for wind drift, elevation, and the thermal effects that altered bullet trajectory in desert conditions. The shot was perfect, silent, and decisive, the kind of elimination that had made the ghost of Kunar legendary. Hassan's voice came through Derek's captured radio, speaking English with the accent-free precision that suggested extensive education and international experience. "Ghost, we know you are watching. We know you can hear us. Come to us, and your friend lives. Continue hiding, and he dies slowly while you listen." Derek's response came immediately, his voice carrying strength that would have made Kevin proud. "Ghost, don't listen to them. Kevin died protecting you. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless by falling for obvious psychological manipulation." The mention of Kevin's name transformed Zara's tactical awareness into personal mission. She was no longer just protecting Fort Sterling or eliminating terrorist threats. She was honoring the sacrifice of a soldier who had died saving her life, and protecting the brother of that soldier who was now risking his own life to help her. Her second shot eliminated Hassan's thermal imaging specialist at 923 meters, removing the enemy's ability to track heat signatures through the base's defensive positions. The elimination forced Hassan's assault teams to rely on visual observation, reducing their tactical advantages and increasing their exposure to counter-sniper operations. "Outstanding shooting, Ghost." Cross's voice came through her earpiece. "Enemy coordination is deteriorating. Continue engaging targets of opportunity." But Hassan's team adapted quickly to the loss of their technical specialists, shifting from coordinated assault to individual infiltration tactics that were harder to counter with sniper fire. They had prepared for the possibility that the ghost of Kunar would engage them directly, and their contingency plans reflected professional respect for her capabilities. The battle continued for 47 minutes, during which Zara eliminated 6 enemy operatives with shots that demonstrated why she had become legendary among both allies and enemies. Each elimination was surgical, precise, and devastating to enemy tactical coordination, but Hassan had saved his best tactical surprise for last. As Zara focused on eliminating his assault teams, he had been moving toward Derek's position with equipment that would force her to choose between her own safety and her commitment to protecting the brother of the soldier who had died saving her. The explosion that destroyed Derek's holding position was visible from Zara's tower, a column of smoke and flame that rose into the desert sky like a funeral pyre. Hassan's voice came through the radio with satisfaction that bordered on professional pride. "Ghost, your friend is buried under approximately 3 tons of concrete and steel. He has perhaps 10 minutes of air, assuming he survived the collapse. Come to me, and I will tell you where to dig. Continue your war from distance and listen to him suffocate." The choice Hassan offered was tactically impossible and morally unavoidable. Leaving her position would expose her to assassination, but staying would mean listening to Derek die in darkness while she maintained tactical advantage. Zara made the decision that Kevin Lawson would have made. The choice that defined soldiers who understood that some things mattered more than survival. She left her tower and began moving toward Derek's position, carrying her rifle and the certainty that she was walking into a trap that would probably kill them both. But some traps were worth walking into, and some people were worth dying for. The rubble that entombed Derek Lawson was a testament to Hassan's thorough planning and his understanding of the psychological warfare that could break even legendary snipers. 3 tons of concrete and twisted steel had collapsed into the abandoned maintenance building where Derek had been held, creating a tomb that would suffocate him within minutes unless someone with the right equipment could reach him in time. Zara approached the destruction site with the fluid movement of someone who had learned to dance with death, her rifle ready and her tactical awareness operating at levels that had once made her invaluable in combat zones. She knew Hassan was watching, knew this was the trap he had spent 3 years perfecting, but she also knew that Kevin Lawson had died saving her life, and she would not let his brother die because she chose safety over honor. "I'm here, Hassan," she called out, her voice carrying across the desert silence with the authority that had once coordinated complex operations under enemy fire. "Show yourself, and let's finish what you started 3 years ago." Hassan emerged from concealment 50 meters away, his own rifle trained on Zara's position with the professional competence that had made him a successful terrorist leader for over a decade. His remaining operatives took positions that created a perfect kill zone, but Hassan's attention was focused entirely on the woman whose legend had cost him so much. "The ghost of Kunar," Hassan said, his voice carrying the bitter satisfaction of someone who had finally cornered prey that had been running for years. 47 confirmed kills, 3 terrorist networks destroyed, operations worth $50 million disrupted. "You have been expensive to our cause." Zara kept her rifle ready but didn't immediately engage, understanding that Derek's survival depended on extracting information about his exact location before the final confrontation began. "Your cause involves killing innocent civilians. I've never regretted disrupting operations designed to murder children." "Innocent," Hassan repeated, his laugh carrying 3 years of patient hatred. "Tell me about innocence, Ghost. Tell me about the children who died when your operations forced us to relocate our training facilities to populated areas. Tell me about the families who suffered when your strikes disrupted our financial networks." The moral complexity of counterterrorism operations had haunted Zara for years, the understanding that every tactical success created ripple effects that sometimes harmed the people she was trying to protect. But Hassan's justification was the rationalization of someone who had chosen to wage war against civilians and was seeking absolution for unconscionable acts. "I've made mistakes," Zara admitted, her voice carrying the weight of decisions that had cost innocent lives despite her best intentions. "But I've never targeted children, never planted bombs in markets, never planned operations designed to maximize civilian casualties. That's the difference between soldiers and terrorists." Hassan's response was interrupted by Derek's voice, muffled but audible from beneath the rubble. "Zara, don't listen to him. Kevin wouldn't want you to die for me. Kevin would want you to complete the mission." The sound of Derek's voice revealed his approximate location and confirmed that he was conscious and breathing. But it also started a timer that would end with his suffocation if the confrontation continued much longer. Hassan understood the psychological pressure this created and used it to his advantage. "Your friend has perhaps 5 minutes of air remaining," Hassan said, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone who had used human suffering as a tactical weapon for years. "Surrender your weapon, and I will tell you exactly where to dig. Attempt to fight, and listen to him die while we settle our personal accounts." Zara's response was the tactical decision that had made her legendary among both allies and enemies. Instead of surrendering or engaging Hassan directly, she dropped behind cover and began moving with the fluid precision that had once allowed her to eliminate targets. While under observation by superior numbers, her first shot eliminated Hassan's communication specialist, disrupting coordination between his remaining operatives and reducing their ability to respond to her movement. Her second shot eliminated the operative positioned to prevent escape routes, opening tactical options that Hassan hadn't expected her to pursue. But Hassan had anticipated that the ghost of Kunar would fight rather than surrender, and his own movement was equally professional. He began working toward Derek's position while his remaining operatives engaged. Zara with suppressing fire designed to pin her down rather than eliminate her immediately. "You have 3 minutes to reach your friend," Hassan called out, his voice carrying satisfaction at the tactical situation he had created. "But reaching him means exposing yourself to my rifle. Choose quickly, Ghost." Zara's response was a tactical innovation that belonged in special operations textbooks. Instead of choosing between Derek's life and her own survival, she used Hassan's overconfidence to create a third option that he hadn't prepared for. Moving with speed that bordered on reckless, she closed the distance to Hassan's position while using covering fire from Fort Sterling's defensive teams who had been monitoring the confrontation through long-range scopes. The coordinated assault collapsed Hassan's tactical advantages and forced him into a direct confrontation he hadn't expected. The final shots were exchanged at distances measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. Close-quarters combat that tested reflexes and training rather than long-range accuracy. Hassan's shot missed by inches, deflected by Zara's tactical movement and the adrenaline-enhanced reactions that had kept her alive in similar situations. Zara's shot did not miss. Hassan died as he had lived, with a rifle in his hands and hatred in his heart, but his death ended a 3-year hunt that had cost too many lives and caused too much suffering. The remaining enemy operatives, leaderless and outgunned, surrendered to Fort Sterling security teams rather than continuing a mission that no longer had purpose or leadership. Derek's rescue required 2 hours of careful excavation using equipment that cut through concrete and steel with surgical precision. When he was finally pulled from the rubble, conscious but injured, his first words were an apology that would have broken Kevin's heart if he had been alive to hear it. "I'm sorry," Derek said, his voice hoarse from dust and fear, but carrying the strength that had sustained him through the collapse and captivity. "I spent 3 months trying to destroy the woman Kevin died protecting. I nearly got everyone killed because I couldn't see past my own grief." Zara's response was the forgiveness that soldiers extended to each other when they understood that war created impossible choices and tragic misunderstandings. "Kevin would be proud of what you did today. You saved lives by providing intelligence under torture. You honored his memory by choosing to help instead of seeking revenge." The medical evaluation revealed that Derek had suffered broken ribs and a concussion, but no injuries that would permanently affect his ability to serve. More importantly, the experience had transformed his understanding of military service and the price that soldiers sometimes paid for protecting people they would never meet. As the base returned to normal operations, Zara faced decisions about her future that would determine whether she continued hiding from her legend or embraced the responsibilities that came with her capabilities. The ghost of Kunar could disappear again, or Staff Sergeant Ilana Vasquez could step into the light and use her skills to train the next generation of soldiers. Colonel Richardson's offer was straightforward and unprecedented. We're creating a new training program for counter-sniper operations. Advanced instruction for soldiers who will face the kind of threats you've been dealing with for years. I want you to lead it. The position would mean the end of hiding, the acceptance of visibility that made her a target for other enemies who had long memories and patient planning capabilities. But it also meant the opportunity to transform her legend into something larger than personal survival. I accept, Zara said, understanding that some choices defined who you were rather than who you had been. But I want Derek Lawson as my assistant instructor. He understands surveillance and documentation better than anyone I've worked with. The partnership between former enemies would become the foundation of training programs that saved hundreds of lives over the following years, proving that redemption was possible even for conflicts that seemed irreconcilable. The war was over, but the work of protecting others was just beginning. 2 years after the assault on Fort Sterling, Colonel Ilana Vasquez stood before a classroom filled with the Army's most promising sniper candidates, her uniform bearing the insignia of rank she had never expected to wear and the decorations that finally acknowledged operations she had never expected to see recognized. The Advanced Counter-Sniper Training Center at Fort Sterling had become the military's premier facility for preparing soldiers to face threats that CONVENTIONO training couldn't address. The enemy's greatest advantage is not equipment or training, she told the assembled students, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned every lesson through experience that tested the limits of human endurance. Their greatest advantage is patience. They will watch you for months, study your patterns, identify your weaknesses, and plan operations that exploit every vulnerability you didn't know you had. Master Sergeant Derek Lawson sat in the front row, his notebook filled with observations that would become part of the comprehensive documentation system he had developed for tracking and analyzing enemy surveillance techniques. His transformation from bitter antagonist to trusted partner had become legendary within military circles, proof that redemption was possible, even for conflicts that seemed irreconcilable. The scars on Derek's face, souvenirs from his time under the collapsed building, had faded but never disappeared. More importantly, the grief that had once driven him to cruelty had been transformed into protective purpose that honored his brother's memory through service rather than revenge. Sergeant Lawson, Ilana called out, using the teaching technique they had developed to demonstrate how former enemies could become effective partners. What would you add about surveillance detection? Derek stood with the confidence that came from understanding his own value and the importance of his contributions. The person conducting surveillance against you often thinks they're invisible, but they leave traces that trained observers can identify. Changes in local patterns, people who appear in multiple locations, equipment that doesn't match the supposed purpose of someone's presence. His expertise in surveillance detection had proven invaluable for training soldiers who needed to recognize when they were being hunted by patient enemies. The techniques Derek had learned during his campaign against Ilana, refined through his experience as Hassan's prisoner, had become standard curriculum for Special Operations personnel. Captain Nathan Cross, now the center's executive officer, watched from the back of the classroom with the satisfaction of someone who had helped transform a personal tragedy into institutional strength. The partnership between Elena and Derek had exceeded every expectation, creating training programs that were saving lives across multiple theaters of operation. The memorial wall in Elena's office bore the names of soldiers whose lives had been saved by techniques developed at the center, but it also carried other names that reminded everyone of the cost of the work they were doing. Staff Sergeant Kevin Lawson's name was prominently displayed, along with the other members of Task Force Reaper who had died in service to operations that prevented civilian casualties. But the wall also carried new names, students from the training center who had been killed in action while applying the skills they had learned at Fort Sterling. Each name represented both success and failure. Success in that the soldiers had been better prepared for the threats they faced. Failure in that preparation hadn't been enough to bring them home alive. The techniques we teach here will save your lives, Elena continued, addressing the new class of students who represented the military's commitment to staying ahead of evolving threats. But they will also make you targets for enemies who understand that eliminating skilled snipers disrupts operations far beyond individual missions. The warning was personal as well as professional. Elena's visibility as the leader of the training center had made her a target for terrorist organizations that viewed her program as a strategic threat to their operational capabilities. Intelligence reports suggested that multiple groups were planning operations specifically designed to eliminate the ghost of Kunar and destroy the training facility she had built. But Elena had learned that hiding from threats was less effective than preparing to meet them with superior training and overwhelming force. The security measures protecting Fort Sterling had been enhanced to levels that rivaled the protection provided for strategic military installations, and the base's defensive capabilities had been expanded to counter threats that went beyond conventional assault. Derek's role in maintaining those security measures had become crucial to the center's operations. His understanding of surveillance techniques, combined with his experience as both observer and target, provided insights that traditional security specialists couldn't match. His documentation of potential threats had prevented 3 attempted reconnaissance operations in the past year. The afternoon training session took the students to the long-range facility where they would attempt shots that tested the limits of their equipment and abilities. Elena watched each student's performance with the analytical mind that had once allowed her to identify enemy patterns invisible to others, but now she was looking for signs of potential rather than targeting solutions. "Outstanding shooting, Williams," she called out as one student achieved a successful engagement at 1,200 meters. "But notice how your breathing pattern changed as the distance increased. Stress affects performance in ways that practice can minimize, but never eliminate completely." The lesson was about more than marksmanship technique. It was about understanding the psychological factors that determined success or failure when lives depended on precision under pressure. Elena's teaching methods incorporated insights from psychology, physiology, and tactical analysis that went far beyond traditional sniper training. As the day's instruction concluded, Elena and Derek walked across the base toward the quarters. They had been assigned in recognition of their unique partnership. The desert sunset painted the sky in shades of gold that reminded Elena of Afghanistan, but without the constant tension that had characterized those earlier sunsets. "Any regrets?" Derek asked, a question he posed periodically as they reflected on the journey that had brought them from bitter enemies to trusted colleagues. "About Kevin?" Elena replied, understanding that Derek's question touched on the source of both their greatest pain and their strongest motivation. "I regret that he died, but I'll never regret that he chose to save my life. I regret that you spent 3 months hating me for something you didn't understand, but I'll never regret that we found a way to work together." Derek nodded, his expression carrying the peace that came from understanding that some losses could be transformed into purposes that honored the memory of people who deserved to be remembered. "Kevin would have liked seeing us work together. He always said the best soldiers were the ones who could turn enemies into allies." The observation carried wisdom that extended beyond military service to fundamental questions about how people chose to respond to tragedy and loss. Elena and Derek had discovered that revenge was less satisfying than redemption, that hatred was less powerful than understanding, and that the best way to honor the dead was to protect the living. As they reached their quarters, Elena paused to look back at the training center that had become the most important accomplishment of her military career. The building housed equipment worth millions of dollars and training programs that were saving lives across the globe, but its real value lay in the proof it provided that enemies could become allies and tragedies could be transformed into triumphs. Tomorrow, we start training the next class, Derek said, his voice carrying the anticipation that came from work that provided meaning and purpose. 42 students from 6 different countries, all of them dealing with threats that conventional training can't address. Elena smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had found her place in the world, not by hiding from her legend, but by using it to create something larger than personal survival. Then we better get some rest. The ghost of Kunar has work to do. The work continued, the mission endured, and somewhere in classrooms around the world, soldiers were learning techniques that would keep them alive long enough to protect the people who depended on their service. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything she had ever wanted her legend to mean. The story of Staff Sergeant Zara Blackwood had ended. The legacy of Colonel Elena Vasquez was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.